My daughter threw a cake at my face when I refused to gift her my house. "It's already mine," she screamed. My name is Martha Mayhew, and I'm 75 years old. I'm old enough to know that the older something gets, the easier it is for people to forget it was ever important. And if you've ever had your own child look you square in the eye and say, "Mama, you're just in the way," then maybe, just maybe, you'll understand. I'm not telling this story to defend myself. I'm not asking anyone to decide who's right or who's wrong. I just want to speak with the voice of a mother who once gave up every corner of her house, every penny from her retirement check, and every warm meal she had for the very people who now call her a burden. There are dinners where no one saves you a plate. There are rooms that used to be yours, now filled with things that no one wants. There are moments when you catch yourself asking, if no one wants me here, then why am I still here? I used to stay silent thinking that was what love was. But silence, when it's held for too long, just turns into a way for others to forget you ever had a name. The cake hit me square in the face. Buttercream and all. The cold frosting clung to my nose, a streak of white sliding down my left cheek, and landing softly on the wool scarf I had knitted just last winter. I didn't wipe it off, not right away. I just sat there for a moment, still hearing nothing but some scattered laughter and a few clinking glasses. No one gasped. No one even muttered a polite, "Oh dear." It's been years since I was the host at my own table, and tonight I was officially removed from it. This house, a 2-story stone home at the end of Willow Lane, right here in Sparrow Creek, Montana, was built back in 1892. I still remember the scent of old plaster the day my husband, Arthur, and I first moved in. Now it just gleams with the soft yellow lights my daughter, Daisy, had installed, complete with motion sensors and Bluetooth music. But there are some things she couldn't replace. The exposed brick wall where I used to hang our wedding photo. The carved oak table that was passed down from my own grandfather. Tonight I was seated at the kids' table, a flimsy folding one that was covered in a disposable tablecloth, wedged right next to the sink by the garden door. My granddaughter, June, was the only one who would glance my way now and then. She didn't say a word. She just quietly placed a bottle of warm water beside me, and then turned away. She knows I can't drink ice water like the younger ones do. The Thanksgiving preview dinner was Daisy's tradition. She likes to test every dish ahead of time, to throw a little dress rehearsal, for her city friends and the neighbors whose husbands all work in banking. I just baked the pecan pie. No one ever eats it. It's too sweet. Too gluten-y. Apparently, everyone's been gluten-free for a month now. The room smelled like cinnamon, some expensive candles, and a roasted turkey. Not the kind I used to make, but the kind that's rubbed with herbs and glazed with honey instead of a good old-fashioned gravy. On the main table stood a bottle of red wine, labeled Greenwood Estate, Holiday Reserve. I read the label again. Greenwood, not Mayhew. As if the house had already changed owners. As if I was just a tenant now. My son-in-law Travis raised his glass, tapped it lightly against Daisy's, and then said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "And here's to a smoother inheritance update this year. Let's make sure everything's transferred before the fiscal deadline." Some people laughed. I didn't. I set my fork down, dabbed my mouth with the corner of a napkin, and I said quietly, but just loud enough for those at the main table to turn and look, "I never agreed to that. The house is still in my name." Daisy's face flushed. She stood up from her chair so fast and walked straight toward me. The room went still. Even the jazz music stopped playing when someone brushed up against the remote. "You ruin everything," she said, louder than she needed to. "We've already planned it all. You don't need to worry. You don't need to interfere." And before I could even speak, the cake, the one I had baked, was thrown right into my face. I didn't feel any pain. Just cold. Cold from the frosting that was now freezing against my skin. Cold from the way everyone was looking at me, like I was some maid who had just spilled wine on the new tablecloth. Travis forced a laugh and said something like, "Every family's got its drama." Someone turned the music back on. The saxophone notes floated up again, trying to cover the thick silence that Daisy's scream had left behind. People resumed their toasts. A few of the guests slipped into the next room, mumbling something about checking on the wine storage for the holidays. Daisy was just standing there, frozen, both of her hands still covered in icing. No one handed me a napkin. I reached for my own scarf and slowly wiped my face. I didn't cry. Tears are something I learned to hold back a long time ago. Back when Daisy had first asked me not to come to her parent-teacher meeting because she said I made her look bad. I stood up. No one stopped me. The chair creaked softly as it scraped against the wood floor. I pulled a tissue from my coat pocket and dabbed the sticky sugar from my chin. I didn't say a word. I didn't look at anyone. June stepped aside quietly. She didn't touch me, didn't speak, but her eyes said something. Something she might never be brave enough to say out loud. I walked down the hallway, the same one where I had once hung Daisy's childhood drawings. And later my granddaughter's. Now there were only wedding photos. Daisy and Travis. Every single frame was engraved with the Greenwoods. A legacy begins. Legacy. And yet, no one ever speaks the name of the one who built it. Before I reached the door, I turned back one last time. No one looked up. They were already back to their roast turkey, their wine, their soft lights, and their artificial laughter. I saw Daisy's back, her perfectly curled hair. The red velvet dress I had ironed for her just this morning. She had said the waist was wrinkled. The door opened. The cold air slapped my face, waking me up. I could smell the snow, the wet pine from the backyard. I closed the door slowly with no rush, as if I was just stepping out for a little walk. But I knew that every step I took across that stone porch, every single footfall on the snow-covered path, was me walking away from a role I had played for far too long. No one called after me. The door shut behind me, and for the very first time no one came running. I hadn't even taken off my coat when I heard my name. Not in a loving tone. I just froze, one hand caught at the collar of my scarf. My breath was suspended in the cold air as the voices drifted down the hallway. The heavy curtains were covering the windows, but the walls weren't thick enough to block out the kind of whispers that are meant to be heard. Daisy's voice came first. Tight, sharp like a drawn bowstring. Then Travis's, lower but no less firm. They sounded like two people who were drafting a plan, and I was just the footnote at the very bottom. Martha won't resist. Your mother's just not the same anymore, Travis said, with a certainty that just chilled me to the bone. I know, Daisy sighed. I'll put the papers in the office drawer. Once she signs, it's all done. I leaned back against the cold wall. This used to be my husband's study. Now it's my bedroom. They were talking about me as if I were already gone. As if I hadn't scrubbed every single brick in this house with my own cracked winter hands. As if the memories I'd hung on these very walls, the autumn embroidery, the faded wedding photo, were just objects in a pending legal transaction. I sat on the edge of the bed, my eyes fixed on the fireplace. The fire was still burning inside, but it couldn't warm what was now burning in me. My hands were shaking, not from anger, but from a deeper kind of ache. I reached for the little notebook I always kept by the lamp. The pages were yellowed, and the corners had been chewed by some mice. My handwriting trembled, but the message was clear. They're trying to put me in a home. There's a transfer document. Don't sign anything. I stared at the words as if I were looking into a mirror. Then, as if my memory had just reached out on its own, I picked up the phone. Rosalind Albright. Her name was still in my contacts even after all these years. A retired attorney, an old friend, the only person who had stood beside me during the court hearing after my husband had died. When the bank had come to take the house because of all the hospital debt, she never took a single dollar from me. She just said, "If you ever need me, you call me." I typed, "If you're still practicing law, I need you." I didn't expect anything, but 15 seconds later, my screen lit up. "Martha, listen to me. Don't you sign a single thing. I'm coming." I bit my lip. In a house that was full of warm lights, that was the only message that had made me feel like I still existed. No one else out there had said my name with such faith. I set the phone down. The wind was howling faintly outside the door. The curtain stayed closed. A dim light was spilling from the hallway. June's silhouette passed by, like a shadow that was cast in some water. I didn't know if she had heard what I did, but a part of me hoped that someone had. Because this time I wasn't staying silent. I sat still in a room with thick walls and heavy drapes, trying to parse each and every sound that echoed from the hall. Footsteps, soft ones, careful. June maybe. And then quiet again. The fireplace exhaled gently, its warmth uneven on my shaking legs under the wool blanket. A few moments later, Travis's voice returned, calm, almost cheerful. We need her to sign before December 1st. That way, everything's finalized before the fiscal year ends. I spoke with Hensley's office. They can file it under a family benefit trust. It's clean. She won't sign, Daisy cut in. She's not stupid. She's just old. Then we'll just follow the protocol, Travis said. Schedule a mental health evaluation. Get the doctor's statement. We'll declare her legally incompetent. Lots of families do this. A cold has just crawled down my spine. I used to be a nurse. I knew those procedures. I knew how people could strip someone of their rights with just some paperwork, with some sterile words, with some neat little signatures on some official forms. And I knew that if no one objected, it would all be called for their own good. I stood up slowly. No more shaking hands. No more pounding heart. Only one thing remained. Clarity. The notebook was still lying open on the table. I tore out the page, folded it in half, and I tucked it into my coat pocket. Then I picked up the pen again and I wrote one more line. They plan to use Family Benefit Trust to seize control. Needs a physician's note. Check which doctor signs. When I looked down, I noticed a little smear of frosting was still on the edge of my shoe. Some butter on the hem of my sweater. I didn't wipe it away. I remembered when Daisy used to get sick as a little child. How I'd sit by her bed, just listening to her breathing. How I had canceled my shifts to stay home with her for 3 nights straight. And now she was planning to put me in some special care, because I was no longer sound. I had never seen things so clearly. The phone buzzed. Another message from Rosalind. I'll be there on the morning of the 24th. Don't you tell anyone. If they ask, you just say, I need more time to think. I nodded to no one, as if she could see me through the walls, through the dark that hung inside this all too familiar room. I stood up, unwound my scarf, and hung it neatly on the hook. Then I walked toward the bed. The room felt bigger now. Not painful, just fast. Like waking up from a long, slow dream. A dream about a home, a dinner table, a daughter who had remembered to be grateful. I turned off the light and sat down again, my back against the wall. Out there they were still talking, still planning. But this time I would not stay silent. Rosalind arrived with an old map. Not to show me the way, but to show me how to disappear. I had been sitting in the hollow mug for nearly half an hour, picking at a cold waffle and listening to the AM radio, which was murmuring about the season's first snow. The long wooden table was all scratched and worn, like the years that had been etched into the hands of the elderly. I had chosen the seat by the window, the one my husband and I used to take. From here I could see the little town square, where the kids were tossing snowballs with their soggy mittens. Rosalind walked in, her posture as upright as it had been back in high school. She was wearing a gray wool coat with a high collar, her silver hair neatly pinned up. She sat down without a greeting and slid a warm paper bag across the table. Inside was a hand-drawn map of Blue Hollow. I'm not here to lead you anywhere, she said flatly. I just want to remind you that there's more than one road, and not all of them lead back home. I didn't answer. My hands just curled around the white ceramic mug. The cafe's name was printed on the side. The air smelled faintly of burnt cinnamon and an old oil heater's steam. Part of me wanted to cry. The rest of me just sat there quiet, the same way I'd been sitting for years in that house. Daisy's almost finished, Rosalind said. I've reviewed the papers. It's the standard template. All that's missing is your signature and a psych evaluation. My guess is they'll start pressing for it probably right after Thanksgiving. I nodded. I found a copy. Travis left it in the desk drawer. I thought so. Rosalind pulled out her phone. I've contacted someone. Silas Grant. He's a private investigator. He used to work with the DA's office. He's a bit rough around the edges, but he's thorough. He can help. Surveillance, recordings, photos, whatever's needed. I glanced out the window. The snow was drifting down slowly. Little white flecks were blowing sideways, landing on the benches like some unwritten notes. Will a recording be enough? I asked. If you play it right. I didn't laugh. Because I know how to play. I've spent most of my life staying quiet about the things I should have just screamed about. The cafe door opened again. June stepped in wearing a navy coat, her hair pulled back into a loose bun. She looked around, caught my eye, and then walked over slowly. Good morning, she said, and then she turned to Rosalind. I hope I'm not interrupting. Rosalind just nodded once, measuring. June placed a small paper bag on the counter. I just stopped to pick up some pastries for my cousins. But I think I should say something. She sat down beside me, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Last night, I overheard a part of a conversation. Not enough to understand it all, but enough to know that you weren't a part of the plan. I met her gaze. There was no anger, no questions. She just continued. For my son's birthday last year, you sent him a cake and a handwritten card. No one in my family has ever been treated like that. I remember it. My throat tightened, but not from any pain. For the first time in a long, long while, someone had remembered something small and they had meant it. June, Rosalind said gently, if you really want to help, we're going to need a witness. Someone who saw and remembers everything. June just nodded. I'll stay. I don't know much about the law, but I know right from wrong. I turned to Rosalind. If I have to perform, then I'll perform. But this time I'll let them write the script and then they can just live with it. Rosalind didn't reply. She just pulled the old map out of the paper bag and laid it gently on the table. The streets had all changed names, and some of the houses were gone. But the little red mark in the western corner was still there. The place that used to be Daisy's daycare center. We used to skip school here, Rosalind said. I smiled. Now I'm skipping out on my own life. We sat for a little while longer, barely speaking. Each of us was just chasing our own thoughts. I traced the fading ink lines on the map. A small town that I thought had held no more secrets. Yet, there were still some corners I hadn't visited in years. Places where I had once been truly myself. Rosalind folded the map and whispered, I'll stay in Blue Hollow until this is all over. I nodded, as if that were only natural. No one sticks around through a Montana winter unless it's for something deeper than just loyalty. For the truth. Her phone buzzed. It was a text. She passed it over to me. Silas Grant. We need a push. A dinner. A wrong word. Paused and then I remembered. Daisy had said she'd be hosting the real Thanksgiving dinner on the 24th. The preview had just been for her friends. Which meant there would be one more gathering, one last chance. I thought of the way Daisy had been looking at me lately, like I was an old tablecloth, not fit for the main table. I used to just ignore it. But now, I would place myself exactly where they could no longer pretend not to see what they were doing. June stood up, as if she had just remembered something. If you need me, she said, I can just act like I don't know anything. But I'll be watching. I'm always in the kitchen. No one ever pays any attention to the one who's pouring the drinks or clearing the plates. I can remember everything. I didn't know how to respond, so I just gave her a long, steady look. June nodded once and then she left the cafe. I watched her figure through the glass and suddenly I thought of my own mother, the quiet woman who had lived right beside me her whole life, and who no one had ever really noticed. People like that. They are the memory of a house. Rosalind leaned in closer, her voice now lowered. Martha, if you're going to step into this game, you're going to need one thing. What's that? Patience. I smiled. Not a sad smile, but the kind of smile that only people who've lost too much know how to wear. Patience, I said. I've got plenty of that. What I don't have is a reason to use it. She placed her hand lightly over mine. Just a small gesture, but it brought back a flood of memories of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, shared in the quiet back corner of the school library. I checked the time. 9:27 a.m. Outside, the snow just kept on falling. In this town, people would pass through each other's lives like footprints, vanishing in just a few minutes. But this time I would leave a mark. I took a sip of my now cold coffee and watched the snow through the window. They'll slip, I said to myself. All I have to do is be there when it happens. We set the table beautifully, because tonight's dinner wasn't just about eating. It was about laying down the cards. I took the linen tablecloth from the old cedar chest. It had ivory hand-stitched edges, a wedding gift from my own mother, back in 1953. I used to think I'd only bring it out for the most special of occasions, and tonight was one. Not for love but for the end of an illusion. I picked out the old china, the blue and white set. The last thing that Daisy hadn't thrown out or replaced with something shinier. I polished every single plate, every fork. Not for them but for me. I wanted tonight's performance to be complete. June was standing in the kitchen waiting as quiet as a soldier. I didn't say much. She understood. I heard the car outside and then the clack of some heels on the stone. Daisy entered first. She was wearing a long coat, a deep red silk dress, and her lipstick was sharper than usual. She walked into the dining room like she was there to collect a trophy. Travis followed, reeking of cologne, his eyes scanning the room like an auditor. "Oh wow. Did you actually cook all this, Mama?" Daisy asked, her fake admiration on full display. I smiled. "It's Thanksgiving, isn't it? Supposed to be complete." Travis chuckled. "That's right. Complete. Food and decisions." We all sat down. June poured the wine. Greenwood Estate. A small detail but a heavy one. On paper they had already begun to brand things with their own name. Things that were never theirs. Dinner began with a honey-roasted chicken, then some mashed potatoes, some buttered green beans, and a pumpkin pie, which I knew Daisy hated. But tonight she just smiled and ate like everything was just fine. I told a few stories, small ones, about the winter I was pregnant with her. Back when this kitchen had no heater, and I used to have to warm my feet with bottles of hot water. They listened like I was reading aloud from someone else's fairy tale. Then Travis set his glass down. "Martha, I think now would be a good time to bring up some of the formalities." Daisy looked up. "Mama, if you're ready, we can just go over the paperwork just to transfer things over. It'll make it easier for us to manage everything." I looked them both in the eyes. "So, which room were you planning to renovate first?" Travis blinked. Daisy laughed. "Yours, of course. We're turning it into a wine room. You know, a classic cellar style. These brick walls are just perfect for it. You're moving to the care home, right?" That moment. It was like a thin blade being drawn across my skin. No blood, but it stung. I didn't flinch. I didn't need to. Behind the kitchen curtain, I knew that Silas was parked just outside. He had his headphones in, linked to the little recorder that was tucked beneath the china cabinet. Every single word was already being captured. Daisy refilled my glass, her voice as sweet as syrup. "See, Mama? Everything's so simple now. You can just rest. We'll handle it all. Your assets. I mean the family's assets. They won't get all tangled up in red tape anymore." I set down my fork and wiped my mouth slowly, not out of any anger, but because I was about to say something I had never imagined I would ever have to say. I placed both of my hands on the table, my eyes on the candle that was flickering from a draft coming through the window. The flame didn't go out, but it did flicker, as if it were eavesdropping. "I just want to be sure," I said softly, "that you two are really prepared to handle everything for me." Travis nodded like a man who was closing a deal. "Of course. You just need to sign. We'll take care of all the rest." Daisy pulled a thick envelope from her purse and pushed it toward me. "It's just a draft of the agreement. Nothing too complicated. You'd still get to live here until you know, didn't want to anymore." I smiled. "You mean until you decide it's time for me to move in?" She hesitated. No, it's just, we think you need a place with more care, more support." "A care home," I said clearly. No one argued. I pushed the envelope away and stood up. June stepped forward with the dessert, but I just shook my head gently. "June," I said, "can you help me retrieve that file from my room a little later?" She nodded, her glance brushing over the other two. Quiet, sharp. I turned back to Daisy and Travis. "You think I don't know anything, but I know everything." Travis frowned. "What are you talking about?" I circled the table, resting a hand on each of the chairs, each piece of china, each stitch in the tablecloth. Every single detail here was a witness to my life in this house. I didn't need to keep it with a signature. I'd already kept it with my entire life. "You think I'm confused. You think I don't understand the process. You think I have no one in my corner. But I've just been listening." Daisy forced a laugh. "Mama, you're being so dramatic." I cut in. "Do you know where I was sitting yesterday?" Travis narrowed his eyes. "Behind the dining room curtain," I said. "I heard everything word for word. Turn her room into a wine cellar. She's not competent anymore. All we need is her signature." The air just thickened. I sat back down, poured myself some more wine. "And tonight, you've just repeated it all voluntarily." Travis shot up. You You recorded us? I didn't answer. June stepped forward, a tray in her hand. She placed a slice of pecan pie right in front of me. A dessert I hadn't made today. On top of it was a folded piece of paper. I opened it. It was a transcript of their words, recorded by Silas, delivered by June. No fanfare. I looked up and met Travis's gaze. I didn't record you, but I know someone who can. Daisy went pale. You're not allowed. Legally. I just looked at her. You can ask Rosalind. She's still holding the originals. They're notarized. And unsigned. Travis just collapsed back into his chair. Daisy looked at him, panicked. I walked over to the bookshelf, opened the third drawer and pulled out a blue folder. I do want to sign something tonight, I said. Daisy's mouth just parted. I opened the folder. They weren't transfer papers. It was a new will, prepared by Rosalind. It clearly stated that the house would remain mine. No legal decision could be made without my signature, and an independent witness. I placed it in the center of the table and looked at them. No anger, no sadness. Just clarity finally laid out between the cold meats, a vintage tablecloth, and some inherited dishes they had thought were already theirs. I poured myself some more wine and I smiled. Good. Then let's sign something tonight. I've brought a different set of papers. Some wills don't pass down any possessions. They pass down an awakening. On Thanksgiving morning, a pale sunlight was filtering through the front windows, casting long streaks across the dark wooden floor of the living room. I was sitting in the old chair by the fireplace. My beige sweater still carried the faint scent of mothballs. That was the scent from when Daisy was still just a little girl, cradled in my arms, wailing from the cold. Across the room, Daisy stepped in silently, a file folder in her hands. Travis followed. There were no words, no eye contact. They thought I would sign. They still believed I was the same old mother, afraid of conflict, always yielding, always stepping back. Rosalind had arrived earlier. She was sitting quietly in the far corner. Her hair was grayer than I remembered, but her eyes hadn't changed. They were still as sharp as a razor, aimed only at the deserving. She reached into her bag, pulled out a thick envelope, and placed it on the wooden table in the center of the room. June appeared just a few moments later without a word. She just nodded at me and then poured some tea, so quietly I didn't even hear her footsteps. I was the one to speak first. Before we all sit down for dinner tonight, I think we need to have a conversation. Daisy let out a weary smile, one that was tinged with triumph. About signing the papers, right? I've brought. No, not about that. About this house, about its future, and about what I have chosen to leave behind. I opened the envelope that Rosalind had placed on the table and pulled out a new will, clearly printed, dated, indexed, and signed. I didn't even need my glasses. I had memorized every single line, had spent sleepless nights over every single word. And then I began to read, slowly and deliberately. I, Martha Mayhew, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare that the house located at 12, Hollow Pine Drive shall not be passed down to any individual family member. Instead, full ownership and all associated value shall be transferred to the Blue Hollow Women's Support Fund, a non-profit organization that serves elderly women who have been abandoned or who lack a place to call home. Silence. There was only the tick of the wall clock. Each second was landing heavy. Travis shifted in his seat. Daisy just stood there frozen. I went on. This decision is the result of events that took place on November 22nd of this year. A recording has captured a conversation between Daisy Greenwood and Travis Greenwood, in which both parties discuss fabricating documents and committing me to an elder care facility, with the intent to unlawfully claim this property. Daisy just staggered slightly. Mama. What? What are you saying? Rosalind's voice cut in, calm, legal, and unwavering. We have the recording. And under Montana state law, any audio that is captured within a private residence where one party is aware, and the other is not coerced is fully admissible in court. Travis just lowered his head. Daisy began to cry. Not sobbing, just that choked kind of cry where the sound gets stuck halfway up your throat. You don't understand. We weren't trying to. I just looked at her. This was the daughter I had once held all through the night while she was burning with a fever. The same little girl I had sold my last pair of earrings for so she could have a pretty dress for her homecoming dance. Maybe I misunderstood once. But that day I understood just fine. June placed a teacup on the table and then sat down beside Rosalind. No one spoke. I nodded. There's one more thing. Rosalind took out 2 additional documents. One for June, one for me. We both signed. Witness 1. Witness 2. No one interrupted. I signed my name for the final time, my hand completely steady. Then I stood up and looked straight at my daughter. This house does not belong to those who already think it's theirs. I didn't need to ask if Daisy had heard me. Her eyes said enough. They were wide, hollow, like someone who had just been slapped with some winter water. Travis stood up stiffly, his arms crossed. Rosalind remained still, just waiting for the inevitable to land. And if either of you need any clarity, I continued, placing another thin stack of papers on the table, this is a full copy of the documents you had planned to have me sign. The ones that outline a full asset transfer in exchange for conditional visitation rights at a senior facility of your own choosing. June cleared her throat. I knew she'd read it. I had left it out on the kitchen counter, just enough for her to see. There was no need to explain. Daisy reached forward, but Rosalind was quicker. Don't, Rosalind said, her lawyer's voice cool and final. These documents were submitted to the Montana state system this morning. Martha's refusal to sign, along with the recordings, are now a part of a formal counter-record. Travis gave a short, bitter laugh. The kind you make when you realize the water's already up to your neck. What does this even get you? He asked. They were his first real words all morning. We weren't taking anything. We just thought it would be easier for everyone. I just nodded. Most things that are easier for everyone start with someone thinking they're more entitled than the rest. Daisy stood up, her cheeks now a deep red. She looked around the room, and then at the photo of her grandfather, the one I'd kept framed in oak and had hung in the brightest corner of the room. He was a lawyer, I said, not looking at her. And he believed one thing. A home is not something you can just trick your way into. I watched Daisy just blink fast. Was it anger? Fear? Or maybe this was the very first time she had ever realized that some mothers don't just stay shelved forever. I said nothing more. Instead, I pulled a pen from my coat pocket. It was the same beige coat I had been wearing the day I had held Daisy for the very first time. My back was stronger then and my hands were unmarked. She had been so small, so soft, like a little bit of dough that hadn't been baked yet. The paper whispered as I signed. Rosalind gave a quiet nod. June laid a hand on my shoulder. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. She had just witnessed more than a signature. I stood up once more, my eyes still on my daughter. A home, I said, each word crisp, does not belong to those who already believe they own it. They left without taking anything, except for the image of themselves that was reflected in each other's eyes. There was no door slamming, just an absence. Long, quiet, and still warm from what had just been said. I was standing in the kitchen, my hand still resting on the kettle's handle. The water was still warm. No one had said goodbye. No one had apologized. No one had asked if I was all right. But for the first time that didn't hurt. The kitchen looked just like it had last night. The old tablecloth had been folded neatly and was set on the chair, the same one I'd been using since our wedding. Every red wine stain, every frayed edge. I remembered hand-washing it in the winter because I didn't trust the machine with my mother's hand-stitched linen. I brought it out so many times for all those family dinners. This time it had been used to reveal the truth. I folded it slowly, smoothing out each and every crease. No rush, no regret. On the wall, Daisy's grandfather's portrait was still hanging. He was wearing a dark suit, looking straight into the camera, his eyes firm and clear. He had spent his entire life practicing law. He had taught me how to write clearly, how to sign with a steady hand, and how to never back down when the truth is yours. I never thought I would need those lessons at this stage of my life. The clink of some porcelain pulled me from my thoughts. June was clearing away the tea. This girl had been working in my home since she was in her early 20s. After her first divorce, I had never asked her much. I just let her stay and bring her son with her. That year he didn't have a birthday cake, so I had baked him one. An apple one. Simple. He had smiled the whole day. Today June set down another apple pie. It was more polished, more fragrant. But the cinnamon smelled the same. I followed the recipe you gave me, she said, placing a knife beside it. It's still warm. Please, you should eat. I just nodded. There were no words. Gratitude doesn't always need to be spoken. Rosalind walked in, holding a leather folder. She wasn't dressed like a lawyer anymore. She was just wearing a long brown wool coat and a scarf that was wrapped loosely around her neck. But she still carried the kind of presence that could hush an entire room with just one look. Here's your copy, she said, placing it on the table. Then she sat down beside me. It's all done. The fund will be announced after Thanksgiving. They can't touch the house anymore. I touched the edge of the folder. Paper is always so cold, always so dry. But today it carried the warmth of freedom. I don't know how they'll react in the long run, I said, still staring out the window. But at least now they know. They know I'm not just some old shadow who gives up everything for some pretend affection. Rosalind didn't answer. She knew. Some truths don't need any comforting. They just need some company. Out in the backyard, the snow was settling on the stone bench. The coat I had washed yesterday was still hanging on the line, and it was now glowing faintly gold in the dusk. A breeze slipped through the doorway, tugging gently at the wind chime. Each chime sounded like it was counting the days I'd stayed quiet in this very home. June poured some more tea. Have you thought about going anywhere? She asked, careful not to break the stillness. I smiled. Not yet. But maybe I'll start teaching a baking class. There are a lot of older women here in town. Many of them live all alone. Maybe they need a place to start over. Like me. June just nodded, her eyes softening. I think a lot of them will come. I wasn't sure. But I knew that one person would show up at that table, me. I pulled my notebook from the drawer, the old brown one with the frayed leather, its spine barely holding together. Each page held a little piece of my life, but I'd never written for myself. Only grocery lists, Daisy's vaccine schedule, Travis's favorite chicken soup recipe. All of them were just notes for someone else. I flipped to the very last page. For the first time I wrote a sentence that wasn't for anyone, just for me. My name is Martha Mayhew, and I still have enough in me to begin again. I inhaled deeply. The air carried the scent of cinnamon, Earl Grey, and something else, something clear, like the pressure in my chest had just been released. Rosalind stood up, adjusting her coat. I need to head out. I still have a few more files to finish. But if you need me, you call me. She didn't smile, but her eyes made a promise. Thank you. For not forgetting me, I said. We never really leave each other, she replied. We just take turns being quiet. Then she left just like the wind. But I knew. Someone who truly knew me had chosen to stay. June tidied up the table but left 2 slices of the pie. This one's for you to keep, she said. The slice from the first time, and the slice for the new beginning. Then she too slipped away. There were no more words needed. The kitchen was quiet again. But it didn't feel empty. I opened the fridge. There were a few red apples. Their skins were tight, glossy. Maybe tomorrow I'll try a new recipe. Maybe I'll write up a little flyer. I'll pin it to the bus stop, to the library. An invitation to all the women who haven't been invited to sit down, to sip some tea, and to laugh over a pie that had cracked in the oven. I'm not leaving this house to Daisy, but I am leaving it to those who understand the value of presence, starting with me. I stepped out onto the back porch. The snow had melted a little, leaving glistening patches under the fading light. I touched the coat that was still on the line, a rough spun wool, but a sturdy beige with a golden hue. It was the same one I had been wearing when I had carried Daisy out into the sun for the very first time. And now it's still here. Just like me. I turned back and looked through the window. The kitchen, a place of laughter, of tears, and of long aching silence, was no longer a memory that I feared. It was a beginning. Not for them, but for me. I opened the door. The cold brushed my cheek. It wasn't biting, just a gentle reminder that a new season had arrived. I stepped out onto the porch and I opened the door wide, as if I were waiting for a new guest, or maybe a new version of myself. Some dinners don't end with a toast, but with the quiet click of a door closing behind the one who had once kept the fire burning in that home. Martha had once yielded, stepped aside, and stayed silent, only to be met with a glance of dismissal in the very kitchen she had helped to build with her own hands. But then she had realized, when you just give and forget yourself in the process, there will come a day when your very presence is treated as something that can be replaced, like an old tablecloth, one that had soaked up both tears and laughter, and had then faded and been folded away without a second thought. Martha didn't choose revenge. She chose to stand. She signed a will that left behind no wealth, only the worth of a life that had been well lived. And if this story made you pause even for just a moment, then think of the woman who once made tea for everyone, each and every morning quietly. And if you're lucky enough to still have her, don't you let her be the one who has to open the door all alone.